Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to my channel. And today's video is going to be on a very specific period in the career of Ted Nugent. And of course, everybody knows who Ted Nugent is, and the trajectory of his work is interesting. There's three original Amboy Dukes records. The first two are definitely a little more psychedelic with some hard rock tendencies, and then the third album is definitely moving in a more hard rock direction and featured Rusty Day on vocals, who went to Cactus, and Greg Arama on bass, who went to Ursa Major. And then there was a weird period where Ted Nugent and Amboy Dukes, or a new version of the band, got signed to Polydor and released Survival of the Fittest. And then On the Rocks, Bottom of the Rocks, sorry, I'm messing up that title. But two studio albums, and they're definitely more prog and they're more keyboard oriented, and so kind of a weird period for Ted Nugent and the Amboy Dukes, and before he kind of defined what we think of as Ted Nugent today. And there was a brief period too in 71, 72, right after the Polydor years, where um, Ted Nugent put together a new band with him on guitar, Rob Grange on bass, who stayed with him for many years afterwards, John Angelos on vocals, and Joe Vitale, of all people, on drums. I think he ended up in Joe Walsh's Barnstorm, and then he was replaced by KJ Knight on drums at some point, and they even got a different vocalist, Danny Gore, at some point. Both those guys left in October '72, and that version of the band actually did apparently record some demos at Criteria Studios in Florida, but those have never been released. But with the folding of that band, Ted Nugent put together a power trio, and it was Ted Nugent on guitar and a lot of the vocals, Rob Grange on bass, who used to be in a band called Sunny Hug, and then Vic Mastriani on drums, who oddly enough I think ended up in the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, but somehow there was some appeal there. Ted and Frank Zappa had met years before and befriended each other. Both of them were definitely against drugs, so that apparently was some bonding with them. But this version of Ted Nugent and the Amboy Dukes signed to Zappa's label Discreet in 1972 and went on to tour quite a bit, including infamous guitar battles with people like Mike Pinera. And so I remember seeing a lot of ads about that, Ted Nugent touring around the country doing guitar battles with other notable guitarists. But I'm a big fan of the two albums Ted Nugent released on Discreet. And I know this is going to be blasphemy for a lot of people, but I prefer it to uh, 74 or 75 when he got signed to Epic and did the classic Ted Nugent band, and Rob Grange continued with that band, and he went on to fame and fortune before that version of the band imploded too. But those two records on Discreet, I think, are just motherfuckers. Call of the Wild in 1973, Tooth, Fang, and Claw in 1974, both of them produced by Lou Futterman, who did a sensational job. But I think they're just pounding. I think the songs are really memorable. Of course, really high energy. I kind of enjoy Ted Nugent's vocals on these, and being a power trio, they pack a lot of punch. And I have to especially point out the drumming of Vic Mastriani. His drums are recorded really well, and he's just a monster on the drums, and it has a lot to do with driving these two records. When you hear Rot Gut and Great White Buffalo and Lady Luck and all these other wonderful tunes on those two records, um, they just really deliver with both barrels, and the drumming is very loud and very polyrhythmic, and I just think they're a monster band. And Call of the Wild, I think, is a little more tuneful, and Tooth, Fang, and Claw is definitely straight hard rock and really pretty heavy in a lot of places, and just incredibly powerful playing, and a lot of Ted Nugent's finest guitar work I think is on these two records, and of course he's mixed really loud as well, and then there's multiple guitar overdubs, so we get a shitload of Ted Nugent's guitar work. And I also noticed finally after all these years, there's a whole bunch of live tapes that have surfaced from this version of the band, and they're even more insane live. They pack a lot of punch. It's super heavy, and of course Vic Mastroianni's drums cut through the mix are super heavy. But there's a lot of just really insane Ted Nugent guitar work on the live shows, including a lot of breaks where it's just the guitar by itself and Ted Nugent showing everything he's made of. And so I think, particularly compared to the Epic period, and particularly because Ted Nugent is such a monster guitar player, this version of the band is really a great vehicle because Ted Nugent's extreme technical abilities and his outrageousness are in full view, and it's just a great thing. And the live shows, as I mentioned, show it even more. And I think these two records were a lot better vehicle for a lot of maniacal Ted Nugent guitar work than either his earlier work or his later work. So that's why I kind of singled out this version of Ted Nugent and his work. I have a real special place in my heart for these 2 years of Ted Nugent and the last time he used the name Amboy Dukes, but I think it really sealed their legacy. And so when you take the whole body of the Amboy Dukes work with all the different personnel and all the different approaches and even the eclecticism of certainly the first 5 Amboy Dukes records, I think this version of the Amboy Dukes really launched Ted Nugent and put him on the precipice for the great fame he had immediately afterwards, because obviously there was a lot of anticipation when the first Ted Nugent album came out on Epic. So these two albums really laid the groundwork for what he would do later. But I know, once again, I think it's going to be blasphemous for some people, but I think the work on Epic sounds almost restrained compared to these two albums on Discreet. And so I'll be glad to hear from anybody else out there that feels the same way I do. I think these two albums on Discreet are just total monsters and really classics of really super heavy rock with amazing guitar work. And so whatever you might think of Ted, you can't take that away from him. An amazing guitar player. And the fact that he did it all with just a big amp and his guitar played straight through an amp with not a bunch of effects, and the fact that he could control feedback and get that much crunch out of his guitar with that kind of rig is even more impressive. So anyway, for you people out there that maybe haven't heard these two records by Ted Nugent, I'm sure there's a lot of people that have only heard his work on Epic. Check these two albums out, and you're really going to see what terrible Ted can do when he's really terrible. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching.